This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there and welcome to the show. I'm happy to welcome my friend Eric Peters back to the program. This is our weekly chat. Eric, I don't know if we ever solve the world's problems, but I always feel like I come away better informed as a result of our discussion. How are you today?
I'm okay. Apparently, it's okay also to burn the American flag. We're not okay to burn the American flag, but it's okay to traffic children.
Yeah, I think everybody who voted for Trump in this last election had good reason for doing so. Looking at the alternative, Kamala and that whole claque of criminals, we didn't want them. But it's decisions like this executive order that seeks to, penalize flag burning with a year in jail. I'm scratching my head over this one.
Well, yeah, I'm more than that. I'm actually quite worried about it because it's of a piece with this. I know the word is overused, but this fascistic tendency toward law and order uber alles. We're seeing it literally deployed in cities such as Washington, and apparently Chicago is next. And I get it. People are feeling tired of thugs running amok and not being able to walk the streets and so on. And so they're welcoming the idea of having guys in camo with automatic rifles walking around. But that's not America. That smacks of like some kind of a third world banana republic, and I don't like it. I think there are better ways to handle the problem. Yeah,
it makes you wonder, at what point would people say, hey, this feels like martial law? I worry that I don't know that they'll ever get there because they're too busy cheering. Yeah, our guy, solved the problem. And they're welcoming what they think is a solution, but I think they may have exchanged the albatross around their necks for a millstone.
Well, sure. It's a dangerous and subtle thing to get used to something that you ought to object to. You remember, this is way before COVID. You remember the Boston Marathon bombing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, very much so.
That was the first instance, and maybe you know of another one, but that's the first instance that I can remember of Americans being quote unquote locked down, i.e. told by the authorities that they're not allowed to leave their own homes. And I thought to myself, that's a very dangerous precedent that's being set. It's got nothing to do with the idea that, there's some criminals out there and the cops are looking for them and chasing them down. The idea that the government is saying you can't step outside of your own house and walk on your grass if you want to without, some thug in a camo outfit and a rifle saying, get back inside. Lockdowns are for people who are convicted criminals in prisons. Somebody got shanked in the yard. Lockdown, put to restore order. And the idea that people got used to that troubled me. And sure enough, a few years later, we got COVID. And all of a sudden, it was like normal to just lock down people. You get used to things, just like people have gotten used to what goes on at the airports now.
I will never forget, nor will I forgive, the police walking through the streets of Boston, pointing rifles at homeowners who were just simply standing at their window watching them walk by. It's just, it was pure intimidation, show of force. Whose streets are streets? And yet it was a neighbor who snuck out for a smoke who actually found the guy that they were looking for.
Sure. Profoundly un-American. And, once that was accepted and people accepted it as being sort of a normal thing that we just have to have in order for some greater good, it became deployed in a much broader way. We had during COVID, I think it was in Minnesota, where Waltz sent out the National Guard to use fire hoses against people who dared to violate the lockdowns.
And I believe there's video footage I've seen of, it was either police, I think it was police rather than National Guard, telling people, get back in your homes and shooting them with pepper, paintballs as they went by. And I'm sorry, that stuff just doesn't fly.
They should understand, that the military and civilian law enforcement used to be, and for a very good reason, completely distinct and different things. Civilian law enforcement was bound by the Constitution. The citizenry had rights. Martial law, you have no rights. You do what they say, period. People in the military are not taught nuance. They're not taught to have a discussion to de-escalate. What they're taught to do is to point a rifle at you and say, do it now.
Yep. And this is the part that disturbs me more than anything. And it's actually a good friend I heard do this yesterday. He was cheering it on, Trump is banning burning the flag and he's deploying these National Guard troops. And he goes, the libtards just have steam coming out of their ears. And I thought, there's the perfect example of someone who hates their enemies more than they love freedom. because they're willing
Certainly.
to cheer on anything as long as they perceive, but it's being done to them, not to me.
Certainly. You know, I was so demoralized during the era of George W. Bush about the same thing when I was excoriated because I dared to raise my hand and say, you know, this Patriot Act stuff, this idea that everybody's going to be treated as a presumptive terrorist, the idea that we're going to empower these telecom companies to monitor everything that we say on the phone, and that every keystroke of our computer usage is going to be logged somewhere, and that we're going to have these secret star chamber courts that nobody's allowed to even go to, that will rubber stamp whatever the government decides it's going to do in terms of surveilling you. That's not American, you know. And but you must be with the enemy. You must be in favor of Islamic terrorism.
Yeah, I caught a full ration of that myself, and I guess it's because of what we went through back then. And you and I were not the only ones. There were other people who, you know, were drummed out of jobs and shouted down. And we're seeing the same dynamic at work here. And I don't use this word lightly, but the cultish thinking of our guy can do no wrong is that's a harbinger for some really tough times ahead.
Sure. If you begin with the premise of ideology and view the world through your ideology, it's a very dangerous thing because you've suspended your own ability to think critically, to look at the facts and think, okay, well, let's look at this and does this make sense or not? And never mind whether it comports with my ideology. Does the thing itself make sense? Is it good or bad? But when you're ideological, you simply force everything to fit into your ideology. And so that's why we have these people in the Trump camp who are just willing to just contort themselves over anything because it's their ideology that's on the line.
I think I may have mentioned this to you before, but probably close to 30 years ago, I interviewed an author by the name of Guy Odom, O-D-O-M. And this is an older dude from Texas and just a real gentleman. But his book was called America's Man on Horseback. And this is what he predicted 30 years ago. He said, essentially, I don't know if he called it Democrats, but he just said there will be policymakers who will continue to be soft on crime and big on multiculturalism and things like that. And he says they will make things so miserable for the people and so much crime that when America's Man on Horseback arrives, he will come in with an iron fist. He will clean things up. He will ship, black criminals will go to Siberia, and white criminals will be sent off to Africa. They'll outsource the imprisonment of them, and people will cheer it because he's offering solutions, even though it comes in the form of a dictatorship. And I'm thinking that guy was prescient.
He was. Well, a student of history. It's almost a mathematical axiom. You create a situation of chaos. Most people don't like chaos. Most people like predictability. Most people like stability. Most people like being able to go outside without worrying about, a gang of thugs accosting them. So you set up the condition where everybody does not know what's going to happen tomorrow and everything is in flux. And then you present, as you say, the man on the horse who comes and says, I will solve these problems. I will take care of everything. And of course, the price you pay for that is ceding your rights, which then becomes sort of conditional privileges in an authoritarian state. And that's where we are now.
Amen. And look, I'm not trying to lay everything, at the feet of Donald Trump. He is the source of all evil. I know people who live like that, and they seem to be the most miserable people I know. But he is doing a really good impression of America's Man on Horseback. He's not afraid to poke the bear. He's not afraid to make, strong, heavy-handed decisions. But I worry that there just aren't that many Americans who are paying close enough attention to see where this is leading.
Yeah, I share that fear. And I think that they're not farsighted enough to understand that the precedents that are being set could very potentially be used in a way that they will not like. They're okay with it right now because they're in line with Trump's thinking. So, for them, the ends justify the means. The problem is that once you lay the groundwork for this, at some point in the future, Trump is not going to be the president. And it's very possible that there could be a backlash against Trump. And the next election, we could see somebody who's even worse than Biden or even worse than Kamala Harris. We could have some kind of really authoritarian left type person come out. And what then? Well, we've accepted all of this, so why not? How could you possibly argue against it, given that Trump has done all these things in the past?
And look at how the swamp still continues to function as a swamp. I don't know if you caught this. This caused a lot of ripples in my circles last week. The FBI, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, gave out medals of bravery to the FBI agents who were involved in the killing of Lavoy Finicum in Oregon almost 10 years ago. It'll be 10 years in January. And here's the worst part about it. In their the commendation for these medals of bravery that they were given were bold-faced, out-and-out lies. Well, Lavoy, he hit a government vehicle and he pinned an agent under his truck. None of that happened. Well, he reached for a gun. That didn't happen either. They called him a domestic terrorist. He was never given due process. He was never convicted in a court of law. In fact, the big shocker was most everybody who was charged in relation to that occupation of the Malheur Refuge was acquitted. But here the FBI is giving out these medals, and I have to think, what kind of message is being sent here?
Well, I think the message is there's no accountability. And we're seeing that now percolate upward in so many different ways. There's been no accountability for Fauci. There has been no accountability for any of these Epstein people. It's interesting, isn't it? All of a sudden, it's Putin is going to meet with Zelensky, Russia, blah, 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 blah. And it's just kind of fallen off the screen. Nobody seems to have any interest any longer in finding out what was going on with the Epstein business. Well, we do, but at the higher levels, nobody seems to care. None of these people who do the most egregious and awful things, if they are powerful, are ever held to account of it. Did you see? This is another odious thing that occurred. There was a sting in Las Vegas of child sex predators, and they caught a guy who's an Israeli. I think he was a member of their cybersecurity detail or something like that. Anyway, somehow the local prosecutor, I think it was, just made sure that dude would be able to get on a plane and get out of the country and get safe haven in Israel rather than face accountability for trying to, apparently, as I understand it, solicit a disabled 15-year-old kid for sex.
Wow. I did hear about that story, and heaven forfend that we say something that is offensive to Israel, but that's a good example of the people who we think are in charge may not necessarily be in charge. Just look at some of the things that are tolerated and the people who are avoiding accountability.
Sure. And, I particularly wonder about guys like Bongino. Patel, I've never really been a fan of him, but Bongino seemed to be a legit guy before he became part of the system. And now that he's part of the system, he just seems to be part of the amen chorus. He let loose a little bit of outrage about the way the Epstein thing was handled, and notice how quiet he's been lately. And now here he is giving medals of commendation to these government thugs who, have killed somebody in a completely unjustified manner and are being rewarded for it.
Yeah, it's maddening. Although I got to give credit to James Howard Kunstler for, I think he had the line of the week last week when he says, well, the greatest miracle of modern times is somehow this administration has managed to resurrect Ghislaine Maxwell's credibility. It's like it's a miracle like we haven't seen in years.
That's funny. That's pretty funny. But it's dark also at the same time. I think people get it. The veil has been parted. We no longer live under any illusion, any Norman Rockwell-ish idea that, the government is composed of, just well-meaning people who are trying to do the right thing to keep the country safe. It's just a bunch of nonsense. We know it's a gigantic grift, a grotesque con, and that for the most part, the people who are in positions of power are truly awful, horrendous people who are just there to make a bunch of money and screw the rest of us over. We live in a banana republic with nuclear weapons.
Scary times. I'm not even going to go into the whole Russia-Ukraine thing, although it appears that Zelensky is getting more unhinged by the moment. Let's shift over and talk about something you and I had touched on off the air, how everything is becoming a subscription. You've got a great example of this. Mm-hmm. I believe it was it Volkswagen that is kind of floating this new model out there?
Oh, yeah. Volkswagen is doing something that Bill Gates pioneered back in the 90s, I think it was, just to set the stage. Do you remember back then when if you wanted to get some software for your PC, you went to the store and you got this box, and in the box there was a CD, and you loaded the CD and you put the software in your computer and you owned the software. Now, it might be superseded down the road by new software. And if you wanted to, of course, you could buy the new software. But if it still worked for you, it was fine, whatever. And you could give the CD to your kid or a friend, and then they could use the software. Well, Gates came up with this great idea. Rather than you owning what you bought, you paid to license the software ongoing. Yeah. And that's the model that they came up with. And now everybody else is doing that, from streaming services to vehicle manufacturers. Volkswagen has made the debut, or has debuted this idea that if you want more power, they'll build it into the car, but if you want to access it, you have to pay a freaking subscription in order to have it. And it's all of the piece with this WEF slogan about how you'll own nothing, which will be very happy. They want us to just constantly be paying to use things for brief periods of time, but to never own anything. Think about how people will get a Kindle and they'll get an ebook, but they don't really own the book because they don't have anything tangible. What they have is a license to read the book on the screen, and at any time that could be taken away from them. This is what they're looking at. They're trying to completely resurrect the feudal system in which most people have absolutely no ownership of anything except perhaps their clothes, and everything is owned by the people who allow you to use it, provided you pay for it, and provided they want to let you pay for it and use it.
I mean, it applies when people want to lease a car. Oh, it's easier to just lease it, trade it in, get a new one. But you're right. The idea is that you don't actually own anything. I mean, you and I are both Gen Xers. We remember what it was like to play music from an LP, from vinyl, yep. And then, cassettes and 8-tracks, and then CDs came along, and we were happy about that. And then it became MP3s. But now, if you want to listen to music, what do? You pay for a streaming subscription, with Spotify or whatever, and every month you kick in the money. And by the way, Spotify can kick you to the curb if they want to. I found that out the hard way.
Sure, and people are getting used to it, and particularly the younger crowd, because they don't have the memory, the ancestral memory that you and I have of actually owning things. So for them, ownership is being increasingly placed out of their reach, particularly with regard to things like vehicles and homes. So sure, why not? I'll just make my monthly payment. They don't understand how dangerous that is, not just in a financial sense, but in the control sense. When you don't even own the place that you live or your vehicle, that means it can be taken away from you at any time by the people who do own it. And that places you in a very vulnerable position. Think about during the whole COVID mess, people who had to go to a job, they had to do it because they had to make the money in order to pay the bills and pay the debt. They were much more likely to bend the knee to all of the COVID rigmarole. Think about the rigmarole people would be willing to bend the knee to if everything that they owned was no longer owned, but they were only allowed to possess it, provided they were good little boys and girls.
No, I'm with you there. I just more than anything, more than just complaining about this, I really want people to just take a breath and think about this at a slightly deeper level. And you don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with Eric. But the more people who take a moment before jumping on the bandwagon, to think about what is really going on, the better. Now, I want to talk solutions for a moment here too. And Eric, I wanted to get your take on this. Going through that period of time, let's just go back to when W was giving us the Patriot Act and the TSA and the extraordinary rendition and domestic surveillance, all of that stuff. You learned very quickly who your friends were and who weren't. And I think we saw the very same thing played out in a much larger scale during the COVID lockdown. So let's talk about why friendship is one way that we can fix the culture, at least at the individual level. If you have good friends, you have something really important. This is even better in many cases than having wealth and power.
Oh, absolutely. We can't survive as individuals. You need friends that have got your back and family members that have got your back. And the one good thing about what we went through during COVID is it was a kind of a wheat and chaff process. You really got to see who your friends were, truly, during that. They were the ones who didn't dump you and excoriate you for not wearing a mask and for not lining up to get jabbed. They were the ones who respected your decision and said, okay, I'm cool with that. That's your body and it's your decision and we're friends. And I'm not going to dump you on account of something like that. So it was hard. I lost a lot of people who I thought were my friends during COVID. But you know what? The ones that I have, I know are my friends and have my back. And if things got bad, I could count on those people, just like they know that they can count on me. And that's an important thing.
And I guess that's the one place where we each have control, because, look, at least as of yet, government cannot mandate who you can and cannot be friends with. There's forced association in many areas, but that's one place where we still get to make that decision. And if you choose wisely, I'm just saying that's a blessing beyond just, the practical concerns of if things were to fall apart, who could I count on?
I agree. We can claw back a lot of the control over our lives that has been incrementally taken away and that they want to take away. To get back to the business with the cars, nobody is yet under compulsion to sign up for endless debt and, a vehicle that's under the control of somebody else. Is it not better to buy a vehicle that you can afford to buy and then you own it, and that isn't controlled externally by technology? I'm very happy with my '02 Nissan pickup. I own it. Nobody else owns it, and nobody else controls it except for me. It doesn't stream data to a hive.
Yep.
The output of its engine can't be adjusted upward or downward except by me if I want to put a cam in it or do something like that to it. Those are the sorts of things that we can do to recover our power. You and I have talked about the importance of figuring out things like growing your own food, having a garden. It doesn't have to be a big farm, but just try to learn how to do things like that. Maybe have some chickens like you and I have done so that you have your own food supply. Learn useful things like that are under your own control, and that way they can control you less. And that's a really important thing to understand.
And I would add only this to that, and that is when it comes to owning something, if you can't put your hands on it, you don't really own it.
100%.
For what that's
100%.
worth, for what it's worth, whether it's money, whether it's tools, whether it's land, if you can't touch it, it's not really yours. Eric, yeah. I feel better for having talked with you. I know that the world still has its challenges, but thanks as always for your time with me today.
Likewise, my friend. Look forward to our next chat.
And I'm looking forward to it as well. I will include a link, by the way, to Eric's website in my show notes, which you can access at thebryanhydeshow.com. By the way, I've started cross-posting these to Substack. Who knew? There's actually a bit of an audience there, too. So for those meeting him for the first time, well, now you can check out Eric's website, subscribe, drop a few shekels his way if you're so inclined.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.